Right now, in refrigerators all over the world, there's a container sitting quietly on a shelf, leftover rice from last night's dinner, looking completely fine, smelling completely fine, waiting to be reheated tomorrow for a quick, easy lunch. And in a few minutes, you're going to understand why that ordinary container might be one of the most dangerous things in your entire kitchen. Not because of anything you can see, not because of anything you can smell, but because of something invisible that starts growing the moment that rice left the stove and started cooling on your counter. This isn't about food going bad the way you think food goes bad. This is something else entirely, something that has quietly sent people to the hospital while they truly believed they were eating something completely safe. And by the end of this video, you're going to think differently about that leftover container every single time you open your fridge. Let's start with something most people have never thought about, because honestly, why would you? Rice feels like the safest food on earth. It's bland, it's simple, it's what you feed to babies and sick people because it feels gentle and harmless. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Raw rice, even before it's ever touched a pot of boiling water, can carry a type of bacteria that survives the cooking process entirely. You read that correctly. Cooking doesn't kill it. This particular bacteria forms something like a protective shell around itself, almost like a tiny suit of armor, allowing it to survive heat that would destroy almost anything else. So when you cook that rice, you're not necessarily starting with a clean slate the way you assume you are. And what happens next, in the hours after cooking, determines whether that rice stays safe or turns into something your body was never meant to handle. Stick with me, because in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to explain exactly what happens inside that pot the moment you leave it sitting out on the counter, and it's the part almost nobody talks about. Here's where it gets serious. Once rice is cooked, if it's left sitting at room temperature, even for what feels like a completely reasonable amount of time, those surviving bacteria don't just sit there quietly. They wake up, they start multiplying. And as they multiply, they release something into the rice that is far more dangerous than the bacteria itself, a toxin, an invisible chemical byproduct that has no smell, no taste, no visible sign that anything has changed. You could look at that rice, smell that rice, even taste that rice, and everything would seem completely normal. That's what makes this so unsettling. Your senses, the ones you trust every single day to warn you when something is wrong, are completely useless here. And here's the part that should really make you pause. Reheating that rice the next day does not destroy the toxin. You can heat it as hot as you want, as long as you want, and it will not undo what already happened while it sat out. The bacteria might die from the heat, but the toxin they already released stays exactly where it is, waiting. Think about how many times in your life you've made a big pot of rice for dinner, eaten what you wanted, and left the rest sitting on the stove or the counter because you were tired, because you forgot, because it felt like such a small, harmless thing to overlook. Think about how many times you've come home late at night, seen that pot still sitting there from lunch, and thought, it's fine, I'll just heat it up. That moment, that completely ordinary, forgettable moment that happens in kitchens everywhere, every single day, is exactly the moment this entire problem begins. And the scary part is, this isn't some rare occurrence limited to unsanitary conditions or restaurants with poor hygiene. This happens in homes, in perfectly clean kitchens, to careful, health-conscious people who simply didn't know the clock was already ticking the second that rice left the heat. So what actually happens if someone eats rice that's gone through this process? This is where it gets uncomfortable, but I think you deserve the honest picture instead of a vague warning. The toxin produced by this bacteria can cause sudden, severe nausea and vomiting, sometimes within just a couple of hours of eating. For most healthy adults, this passes, unpleasant, miserable, but temporary. But for children, for elderly people, for anyone with a weakened immune system, the consequences can be far more serious. And here's what makes this particularly cruel. Because the symptoms come on so quickly and violently, most people never even connect it back to the rice they ate the day before. They blame a stomach bug. They blame something else they ate. They never realize that the leftover rice sitting so innocently in their fridge was the actual cause, which means they do the exact same thing again next week, with the same forgotten pot, the same room temperature counter, the same invisible risk building quietly in the background. Now here's the question you're probably already asking yourself. Does this mean you have to throw out every container of leftover rice in your fridge right now? No, and this is actually the empowering part of this entire story, because once you understand the mechanism behind this, protecting yourself becomes incredibly simple. The danger isn't rice itself. The danger is time spent at room temperature. Bacteria multiply fastest in what's often called the danger zone, the temperature range between the warmth of freshly cooked food and the safety of properly refrigerated food. The longer rice sits in that middle ground, the more time those surviving bacteria have to multiply and release their toxin. which means the single most important thing you can do, the thing that changes everything, is getting that rice out of the danger zone as quickly as possible after cooking. This means resisting the urge to let a big pot cool completely on the counter before putting it away, something so many of us were taught to do because we worried about putting warm food directly into the fridge. That old habit, the one your grandmother probably taught you, the one that felt like common sense, might actually be working against you. Rice should ideally be refrigerated within an hour or two of cooking, not left out through an entire evening, not forgotten on the stove overnight. And when you do reheat it, it should be heated thoroughly, all the way through, steaming hot, not just warmed until it feels comfortable to eat. Here's something else worth sitting with for a moment. This isn't really a story about rice. It's a story about how many things we do every single day out of habit, without ever questioning why, simply because that's how we've always done it. That's how our parents did it. That's what felt normal and safe. And sometimes the things that feel the most harmless, the most ordinary, the most beneath our attention are exactly the things worth taking a second look at. It's not about living in fear of your own kitchen. It's about understanding what's actually happening behind the scenes of the things you do automatically. So you can make small adjustments that genuinely protect the people you're cooking for, whether that's yourself, your kids, or your aging parents. Think about the last time you reheated rice without thinking twice about how long it had been sitting out. Think about how confident you felt doing something you've done 100 times before, the same way most people feel confident about it, right up until the moment it actually causes a problem. Knowledge like this doesn't come with dramatic warnings on packaging. It doesn't get taught in school. It quietly exists in research papers and food safety guidelines that most people never read, while everyone else continues doing what they've always done, assuming that familiarity equals safety. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to hear the answer. Before watching this, did you know that reheating rice doesn't destroy the toxin once it's already formed? And be honest, how long does your leftover rice usually sit out before it makes it into the fridge? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I guarantee you're not the only one who's about to change how they handle that pot tonight.